The money I still got, the jewels I still got, the cars I still got, the mansions I still got. You either motivate it or you hate it. Either or, it doesn't matter.
Money, money, money. It's the clacking sound of the cash register that gets your heart rate up. Whether you're a regular Joe or a fighter. I mean, who doesn't love some dollar bills? It's no news that boxing stands tall among all others when it comes to the fattest paychecks. When you look at fights like the Mayweather-McGregor fight that made over $500 million in revenue, or the Mayweather-Pacquiao fight raking in a huge $4.6 million pay-per-view, the highest in boxing history, and also making over $500 million in total revenue. And notice the central figure in these fights? It's Floyd "Money" Mayweather himself, and he made a combined over $500 million from these matches. Now those are insane figures. It's no wonder why this guy is one of the highest paid athletes of all time. Now let's take a trip to the UFC, another combat sport that fiercely rivals boxing today. The biggest pay-per-view event in UFC history saw Khabib Nurmagomedov defend his UFC lightweight championship against McGregor, and the fight generated 2.4 million pay-per-view buys and $180 million in revenue. Forbes states that The Notorious was paid $3 million and Khabib Nurmagomedov took home $2 million. However, it's important to add that this was before any additional sources of revenue were added, such as performance bonuses, sponsorship, and pay-per-view points, because the UFC closely guards its actual pay-per-view sales numbers, so they don't disclose any back-end monies paid to the fighters. However, Nurmagomedov is rumored to have made close to $30 million, while McGregor's total pay from his fight is rumored to be around $50 million. But still, you see where this is going. The difference in pay gap is so huge that it's hard not to question why two arguably equally dominant sports have such a huge difference in pay. First of all, it's important to note that the pay gap difference only exists at the top. That is, boxers who are just starting their careers don't necessarily get paid like their UFC counterparts. There is a huge level of disparity between the middle and lower tier boxers and the headliners. And while the headliners can make tens of millions of dollars for a fight, the vast majority of professional boxers earn peanuts. For example, in the undercard for the Mayweather-Conor fight, 6 boxers made under $25,000 for 3 fights. Most of the boxers on a card don't get gate or pay-per-view revenue, and this is due to the way boxing pay is structured, which we'll soon dive into. However, we've established the fact that boxing stars do get paid significantly higher than UFC stars. Now, this is why. One word that perfectly describes the situation is monopoly. Yeah, it's a word you've probably heard quite a few times. You see, one of the major differences between boxing and the UFC is that boxing is a free market. In boxing, there are multiple promotions, multiple belt organizations, and most importantly, there is no one governing body, meaning that fighters get a lot of freedom in terms of negotiating contracts and getting competitive pay. Promoters organize the fight card, which features multiple fights in one night. They collect money through ticket sales, the sale of broadcast rights to TV networks, and site fees. But before any of this happens, they usually have to bid among a pool of promoters to secure the rights from the boxing sanctioning bodies, like the WBA, WBC, IBF, and the likes. Then, this is shared between the fighter, the promotion, manager, trainer, and the rest of the crew. So now you can understand why not all boxers get a hefty payday. If a boxer is not happy with the pay they're getting at one promotion, they can easily jump ship to another promotion and get better pay. The top boxers are essentially operating as co-promoters and negotiating a slice of the entire pie to put on an event that is essentially just for them versus their opponent. While someone like Mayweather was totally self-promoted, meaning he didn't have to give a portion of his earnings to a promotion like Pacquiao, who had to pay a significant percentage of his to his promoter Bob Arum. Now you see, this is different entirely in the UFC scene. The UFC signs its fighters to a contract, which simply means you get what this guy gives you. He makes the fights, he pays the fighters, and he won't tell you differently.
People like to push the buttons and talk about fighter pay, and you don't ever see us coming out and talking about it or doing whatever, because I don't give a shit. When I got 20-something-year-old Jake Paul, a fucking YouTuber, talking about fighter pay, or these other guys on the internet we know what the hell we're doing over here. And at the end of the day, my philosophy is always this: it's nobody's fucking business what these fighters are making. None of these guys are under some type of gag order in their contract. Any fighter on the roster can come out and tell you guys what they make. I've said this a million times. They can come out and tell you what they make. Ask them what they make. What'd you make tonight? They can tell you. They don't tell you. You know why they don't tell you? They don't want you to know. Listen, if you don't like how we run our business, go start your own.
And if he feels you deserve $5,000, that's what you get. Same if he feels you deserve $1 million. UFC fighters are bound by a contract, and you could think of them as artists signed to a record label as compared to boxing stars as independent artists. The UFC simply pays you what has been agreed on your contract. So let's say you join the UFC as a prospect and signed a contract. You get paid based on what's on that contract till it ends. If you become more famous and generate higher pay-per-view, you get higher pay only, as that adds to your fixed pay. Because unlike boxing, all fighters on the pay-per-view portion of the UFC get a small split of the pay-per-view sales, with the main and co-main event getting the largest portion. UFC fighters are simply just employees or players within the league, so they're inclined to only get as much money as the UFC wants to give them. And the UFC is going to take a majority of the money that was made through that event and bring it back into the brand. Another thing UFC fighters don't have is the Muhammad Ali Reform Act, or the Ali Act, a federal act that was passed in 2000 that protects boxers from some of the exploitation that was done by promoters. So it's very simple. In boxing, two fighters come together, they have to negotiate, and it's open. But the UFC is only one company who owns both fighters. Besides the major difference in how the money is split up in each sports event, there is also the opportunity for a boxer to make hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars from sponsorships, something that UFC stars do not have. In boxing, you've probably noticed that the biggest stars wear some of the biggest brands on their shorts, from Dolce & Gabbana, Hublot, and the likes. And you can be sure that these sponsorship deals are worth hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars. The case is different in the UFC, with restrictive contracts with certain companies involving endorsements and sponsorships, which the fighters are to sign and be a part of if they want to fight in the octagon. Some say boxing, being a more popular sport and having been around for so long, is one of the main reasons why boxing stars make so much money compared to UFC fighters. But when you look at all these facts, you get a clearer picture of the actual reason. The UFC has undergone so much growth in recent years that popularity is no longer a thing to deny. Imagine competing in one of the world's most dangerous sports and still having to back up with working at Walmart to keep up with your expenses. It's clear to see that MMA stars in search of big bucks know exactly where to head after leaving the UFC. Tyron Woodley did, and said he made more money in 2 boxing fights than he had ever made in his entire UFC career. McGregor did, and got the fattest paycheck he has had in 1 fight in his career. Francis Ngannou's departure from the UFC is the latest to show that these top fighters in the UFC might not actually be contented with what they are getting. Imagine a warrior like Ngannou, who had done it all in the UFC, claimed the heavyweight title, and became the face of the sport, getting paid $600,000 to $700,000 to fight. Peanuts compared to the average boxer. Ngannou had had enough, and he sought greener pastures. And there was Tyson Fury, the man who gave Ngannou the opportunity of a lifetime. And while Ngannou might not have made close to McGregor, the purse was fat.